Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to India-Myanmar relations, as Myanmar is experiencing a multi-sided civil war and the junta regime there has ended the state of emergency and called for elections in December. The second article is related to Global Plastics Treaty, as the negotiations for the same will resume in order to create a binding legal framework to end plastic pollution. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified which will be helpful for your prelims and mains preparation. The first article is related to India-Myanmar relations. The context behind it is that there has been a civil war, a multi-sided civil war going on in Myanmar since quite some time, since 2021 coup especially. The coup done by the Myanmar military, the junta there, which has been in power ever since. The earlier democratically elected government was ousted, Aung San Suu Kyi was ousted. Now the Myanmar junta regime has stated that the country is no longer in a state of emergency and it has called for elections in December. So we will discuss the significance of Myanmar for India, the challenges that Myanmar faces which can have an impact on India, and the suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS2 under the topic India and its neighborhood relations. Now first let's discuss the significance of Myanmar. Myanmar is an important bridge for us, the bridge for connecting to the ASEAN countries, the Southeast Asian countries, and it is a vital cog in ensuring regional security, in ensuring connectivity to the region. When we look at it from a strategic point of view, we share a long land border with Myanmar, 1643 km long land border which spans across the states Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, and we border the Kachin, Sagaing and the Chin provinces of Myanmar, and it is the only ASEAN country which is adjoining India. Therefore, Myanmar can be our gateway to Southeast Asia, and it is important for furthering our Act East policy, our neighborhood first policy, and for ensuring cooperation with the BIMSTEC multilateral as well. The historical and cultural ties are also of significance with respect to Myanmar, as we have a shared Buddhist heritage. For example, the restoration of the Anand temple in Bagan, and most of the Myanmarese citizens, they follow the Theravada Buddhism in Myanmar, and therefore we have the shared Buddhist heritage. And there are cultural exchanges also. For example, the Ramayan performances are also done in Myanmar, and there are the performance troops functioning there. In terms of defense, we have a memorandum of understanding on the border cooperation, on the military training. The military of Myanmar used to be trained in India, and there are collaborations across the counterinsurgency and border security initiatives. From the economic point of view, the ties are strong. The bilateral trade between the two countries as of fiscal year 2025 itself is about $2 billion. And India is the 4th largest trade partner of Myanmar. The exports from India to Myanmar are also significant. For example, the pharmaceutical sector itself, 60% of the market share in Myanmar is held by India in terms of the pharma exports to Myanmar. And there are exports of machinery as well as vehicles also. We import as well from Myanmar. The imports are mostly the agricultural products, for example, the pulses, urad and the tur dal and the wood products, etc. Simultaneously, there is a rupee kyat trade settlement mechanism also, and it was set up in 2024, and therefore 9 Myanmarese banks, they also go for settlements in the Indian rupees. Also, India is the 11th largest investor in Myanmar. Even the banks of India, they are also operating in Myanmar. The State Bank of India, the Punjab National Bank, they are operating in Myanmar as well. And Myanmar has the energy potential also, particularly the natural gas. It has good amount of reserves there, and even India's ONGC and GAIL, they have stakes in the projects ongoing in Myanmar. In the aspect of connectivity as well, Myanmar is of utmost significance for us. For example, we are investing in the Kaladan multimodal transit corridor. It is multimodal as the transit happens through the sea route from Kolkata to Sitwe, then through the riverine route from Sitwe port to Paletwa, and then through the road route from Paletwa to the Jorinpui. And the Sitwe port is already operational. More than 185 vessels have berthed there, and Jorinpui Paletwa road construction is also underway. In terms of connectivity, there is also the investment in the India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway, the trilateral highway that is being constructed, and here the lead is taken by the Indian National Highway Authorities of India. For the development as well as humanitarian assistance, there is assistance from the side of India. For example, we have invested in the border area development program. Through the border area development program, we are investing in the projects in the Chin province in Myanmar and also in the Naga regions, as about 179 projects have been taken up for investing in the schools, health centers, and for the building of the roads in this region. Through the Rakhine State Development Program, also there is the setting up of prefabricated houses by India, the water supply, solar electrification projects taken up by India in the region, and through the Operation Brahma, we assisted Myanmar when there was an earthquake in 2025. We sent a medical team, we also sent the relief supplies. For the flood that was there in Myanmar in 2024, we sent in efforts for the relief as well as sending in aid in the form of rice and medicines. And we have a significant Indian diaspora presence also there in Myanmar. About 2 million people in Myanmar are of the Indian origin. But Myanmar faces certain challenges as well, and these challenges will have the impact on India. So we'll discuss the challenges of Myanmar, which can have the cascading impacts, the repercussions on India as well. For example, the first one, the Tatmadaw, the Myanmarese parliament. There the Myanmarese military, the junta regime, which is known as, it is in power. It came into power through the 2021 coup. Through the 2021 coup, it ousted the earlier democratically elected government, the National League for Democracy. Aung San Suu Kyi was ousted, and the MPs of the NLD, they fled. They fled to India, into Mizoram. What was the response of people in Myanmar? They protested. They formed the ethnic armed organizations. The protesters even set up People's Defense Forces. How did the junta regime respond? It conducted airstrikes within Myanmar. The airstrikes, they even created problems like food scarcity in Myanmar. Now, this is not the first coup that happened in Myanmar. There have been a series of coups there, the starting first coup being in the 1960s. Therefore, due to this checkered history of the Myanmarese military, the junta regime, there is little faith, little trust that the people of Myanmar have in the Myanmarese junta regime, and therefore even the elections that they have announced to conduct, there is a fear that they may be farce elections. Therefore, due to this instability which is created in Myanmar, it may lead to the northeast instability as well in India. Another challenge is the problem of Rohingyas. The Rohingyas are the ethnic Muslim minority in the Rakhine state of Myanmar. But in 2016-17, the Myanmarese junta, along with the local security forces, carried out a campaign against the Rohingyas in the Rakhine state. They killed thousands of Rohingyas there. Although it led to the calls that these are acts of genocide across the international community, these acts were criticized. But the Aung San Suu Kyi led government was forced to defend the Myanmarese junta actions across the international forums. What did it lead to? The Rohingyas, they also set up the armed organizations to protest, and they even fled from the Myanmar, and this led to the creation of the refugee crisis in India. Another challenge is the interference from the side of China. China has been an ally of the military regime there. It has provided the de facto recognition to the Myanmarese junta regime. It wants to advance the economic interest of China, for example, through the investments in the China-Myanmar economic corridor. We can see the investment, for example, in the mining and the processing plants like Leptadang copper mine and the Tagong nickel processing plant. And we can even see that it wants to connect the Yunnan province of China, the landlocked Yunnan province of China, to the Indian Ocean region through the China-Myanmar economic corridor. Also, what was the response of the people of Myanmar? There is resentment among the Myanmarese people against the Chinese investments, Chinese setting up of infrastructure projects there. We can see that, for example, there were attacks on the Chinese consulate as late as in October 2024 itself. Simultaneously, there is the problem of economic collapse, which is also observed in Myanmar. For example, there is the nationalization of resources, which happened ever since the first coup which happened in Myanmar in 1960s. There was the nationalization of resources. It attracted sanctions from the international community, and due to these sanctions, the foreign investors also started pulling out, and therefore there were constraints, there were sanctions, and there was instability in Myanmar, which led to the fleeing of the foreign investors' money from there. How does it impact India? It will also impact the investments that India is doing there, the infrastructure creation that India is going to do there. Now, another challenge is the junta ethnic groups clashes. Because the people were protesting against the junta regime, the various ethnic armed organizations, they came up together and formed alliances. The popular one being the Brotherhood Alliance, and it is between the Myanmar National Democracy Alliance Army, the Arakan Army, and the Tang National Liberation Army. And it led to the retaliation from both sides and created further refugee problems, and those refugees poured into the northeast region of India. Another challenge is the free movement regime. The free movement regime was put in place between India and Myanmar because the people of the border region between India and Myanmar had ethnic and familial ties. Therefore, the people at the earlier stage could move in the free movement regime without the visa requirement. Just a border pass was created, and this border pass was valid for the movement in the free movement regime region. But this led to the illegal immigration also of the Kuki Chin people into India. And last year, the Home Minister Amit Shah even observed that the free movement regime may be scrapped, but it was not suspended. Rather, new guidelines were formed to regulate it. Now, the border passes are issued for 1 year validity, and a person can visit in the free movement regime region for 2 weeks at a time, and biometrics are recorded, and this is regulated through the Assam Rifles. But earlier stage, the free movement regime was 40 kilometers, then it was reduced to just 16 kilometers in 2004. Now it is only 10 kilometers. And another challenge is also the natural disasters. For example, the earthquake, the recent earthquake in Myanmar. Now, Myanmar will need more loans for the reconstruction, rehabilitation, and the aid activities in Myanmar due to the havoc created by the earthquake, but it is already in debt, and the debt is more than $12 billion as per the International Debt Report 2024. And it even led to some damage to the India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway infrastructure also. Another challenge is the Japanese aid as well. Post the coup which happened in Myanmar, the Japanese aid has been shrinking there. For example, it suspended the new aid projects that it was taking up in Myanmar because there was a pause from the side of JICA, the loans that Japan gives through JICA to Myanmar also. It scaled down upon the diplomatic engagements, that it earlier had with the democratically elected government. Now the engagements with the Myanmar military regime are way lesser, and it even supports the ASEAN's 5-point consensus. The 5-point consensus calls for an end to violence in Myanmar and a political solution. A solution arrived through a politically inclusive dialogue, therefore. Now, what can be the impact of these challenges on India's northeast region, especially? The northeast region will have a disproportionate impact as there is a porous border between India's northeast and Myanmar due to the free movement regime, and it leads to the influx of the refugees into India. And these refugees, if coming into India and settling here permanently, for example the Kuki Chin people, this may lead to the alteration of the demography of India's northeast also. And due to the porous borders, smuggling also happens. The smuggling of both the arms as well as the narcotics, the drugs, and through the narcotics trade, the financing of the armed organizations also happens in the region. And plus there are ethnic ties which can also not be severed. If there is a stopping of the free movement regime, it can lead to the disruptions across the demographies in both countries, and the investments will also be impacted. The investments will be impacted if there is instability in the region, and the trade routes may also be disrupted that India is trying to create by establishing linkages through the connectivity projects like the Kaladan and the Trilateral Highway. And it may even affect the stability and peace as well, as the stability of the entire northeast region is also dependent upon the stability in the neighborhood, the stability in Myanmar as well as the stability in Bangladesh also, since India's northeast region is connected to the mainland through the Chicken Neck corridor. Now, what are the suggestions that we can give for furthering India-Myanmar relations? One, India can invest in the high impact development projects. The investments in high impact development projects will lead to the employment generation for the locals in Myanmar, the infrastructure creation in Myanmar, the generation of goodwill for India in Myanmar, and we can also strengthen our support for the democratic institutions in Myanmar. For example, promoting the free and fair elections in Myanmar. And we need to balance our economic goals versus the humanitarian goals that we have with respect to Myanmar. We have economic goals, for example, ensuring the connectivity to the ASEAN region through the Kaladan IMT Trilateral Highway, the ensuring of energy cooperation, the economic cooperation in general with respect to Myanmar. But we should also focus simultaneously upon our humanitarian goals, the aid, the assistance, the disaster relief that we are giving to Myanmar. We can also expand the cooperation across multilateral fora, for example, cooperation in the BIMSTEC, and we should go for the multi-stakeholder engagement with respect to Myanmar, engaging not only with the junta regime but also with the political leaders, the vocal supporters of the democracy in Myanmar. There is a means practice question also. India-Myanmar relations are critical to India's Act East policy, national security and regional connectivity. Examine the strategic significance of Myanmar for India. Discuss the major challenges in bilateral relations and suggest measures to strengthen the partnership in the current geopolitical context. Please try to write it. The next article is related to Global Plastics Treaty. The context behind it is that the negotiations for the Global Plastics Treaty is set to resume again, and it is to create a legally binding framework to end the plastic pollution globally. So we will discuss the problems of plastic pollution, the challenges in ending it, the government initiatives in this regard, and a few suggestions. This is important in GS3 under the topic Conservation, Environmental Pollution and Degradation. Let's first start with some data. Globally, the oceans receive more than 9 million tons of plastic annually, and they receive it through the rivers. The rivers function as the conduits. They carry the plastic waste from the land to the oceans. Agriculture itself contributes more than 12 million tons of the plastic waste globally. And the packaging industry is one of the largest contributors, as more than 1/3 of the global plastic waste production is from the packaging industry itself, about 36% of it. When we look at India specific numbers, India generates more than 25,000 tons of plastic waste every day, and 40% of the plastic waste generated remains uncollected. And with respect to the Himalayan region itself, more than 22,000 tons of plastic waste is generated here. Now the plastic can also be categorized. It can be macroplastic, which is more than 25 millimeter in size. It can be microplastic, which is less than 5 millimeter but more than 1 micrometer in size, as less than 1 micrometer will be nanoplastic. Microplastic is emerging as one of the major pollutants now. It comes from both sources, the primary as well as the secondary sources. The primary sources entering into the chain at the same range, for example, the nurdles, the pellets, beads, industrial raw materials, abrasives, synthetic textiles, etc. Whereas the secondary plastic is that plastic which was not manufactured in this size, rather it was larger, but due to weathering, due to fragmentation, it broke down into smaller pieces and it became microplastic. For example, the fiber, foam, fragments and the larger plastic products breaking down. Now the plastic can have an adverse impact on the health. It can have an impact on the organs of the body, including brain. For example, it can cause the nervous system function impairment. With respect to lung, it can cause the pulmonary inflammatory response and functional impairment. And for the liver also, it can cause the metabolic disorders. With respect to kidney, it can cause a significant impairment of the renal functions. And with respect to gut, it can affect it adversely by causing ecological imbalance and the metabolic disorder of the flora there, and it can even cause the reproductive problems as well. When we look at the plastic pollution, we are inhaling it as well. As the macroplastics, larger plastic particles, they are blocked in our nose itself, but the microplastic, we are inhaling it and ingesting it as well. Now, what are the challenges associated with the plastics? Why can't we avoid it? One of the challenges is it is the need of the industry, especially the textile industry, the tire industry. They need plastic for the packaging, and there is no global treaty also as of now. Now we are trying to sign the global plastics treaty to end the pollution globally, and the alternatives, they are costly. For example, the biodegradable plastic, that is more than 50% costlier than the normal plastic which is used, and the recycling mechanisms, they are inefficient. For example, globally just about 9% of the plastic is recycled, 79% of it is dumped, and just about 12% is incinerated. And that incineration, that is also the burning, which causes further the fumes, and it causes the global warming and the pollution as well. And then there is the problem of microplastic also, and the marine plastic pollution, the marine plastic pollution caused by litter, etc. The another problem with the plastic is it survives in the atmosphere for a long period of time. For example, the degradation of the plastic takes a long time. Grocery bags, they take 1 to 20 years. The aluminium cans can take up to 200 years to be degraded. Even the disposable diapers, plastic bottles, they can survive for about 450 years before they are completely degraded. Now, what are the steps that have been taken up to eliminate the plastic pollution in India? First, India came up with the Environmental Protection Act 1986, and then there were the Hazardous Waste Management and Handling Rules enacted in 1989 and the Municipal Solid Waste Management Rules 2000. For plastic specifically, there were the Plastic Manufacture, Sale and Usage Rules put in place in 1999. These rules prescribe that there should be a minimum thickness of the carry bags. The minimum thickness should be more than 20 micrometers. There was a minimum thickness prescribed so as to increase the cost of production of the plastic carry bags. The increased cost will discourage the usage of the plastic carry bags. This was further revised in 2011 when the minimum thickness of the carry bags was increased to 40 micrometer. Simultaneously, the extended producer responsibility concept was also introduced, that it is the duty of the producer to also ensure the collection of the plastic waste and the recycling. And there was an explicit pricing of the carry bags which was introduced in 2011. In 2016, there was further amendment by increasing the minimum thickness of carry bags to 50 micrometer, and the assignment of responsibilities also, the responsibility to the local bodies for ensuring that there should not be littering of the plastic waste, imposition of fines, etc. And in 2021, the single-use plastic ban was notified, and also the minimum thickness of the carry bag was further increased to 75 micrometer first, and then in 2022 to 120 micrometer. The other steps taken up to eliminate plastic pollution include the UNDP India's Plastic Waste Management Program 2018 to 2024. Simultaneously, the ban on the single-use plastic started from 2021 in India. The Plastic Waste Management Amendment Rules 2022 ensuring EPR, and the India Plastics Pact by 2030. That is to ensure that the usage of plastic in India should be for the compostable or biodegradable plastic by 2030. Additionally, we came up with the Project Replan, that was to ensure that the plastic carry bags or the other products which are produced there should be a mixing of the cotton fibers in the production of the recycled plastic carry bags. And the Go Litter Partnership Project, that was to eliminate the marine plastic pollution. Latest in 2024, India came up again with the Plastic Waste Management Amendment Rules, which expanded the definitions of the manufacturer of plastic. Earlier, the manufacturer of plastic did not include the manufacturers of compostable plastic or biodegradable plastic. Now, both the manufacturers of the compostable plastic and the biodegradable plastic have been included in the definition of the manufacturer, and the responsibilities of the local bodies have been assigned further. For example, they have to prevent the sale and usage of the prohibited plastic in their regions. And there is the selling of the plastic raw materials. Now the selling can be done to the registered plastic manufacturers only, and the manufacturers, they also have the registration and reporting obligations as well. They have to get themselves registered with the state pollution control boards, and they have to maintain the annual reports and give the annual report also to the state pollution control boards. There is the introduction of a new category of the biodegradable plastic also, and the thickness requirement that is put in place, it is exempted for the biodegradable plastic bags and the compostable plastic bags, because they are anyway 50% costlier than the conventional plastic bags. And also there are pre-consumer waste processing obligations also. These obligations are for the manufacturers, that if there is any waste generated at the end of manufacturer itself, then it is the obligation of the manufacturer to compost that waste or to process that waste. And there is the minimum recycling target also, which has been introduced through the amendment of the rules. And the MSMEs, they are exempted from the extended producer responsibility obligations. Now there is a call for the Global Plastic Treaty also. Through the Global Plastic Treaty, there are demands for compensation for the developing nations, because for them to transition from the plastic to the biodegradable alternatives, they will need money, and they will also need technology that has to be transferred through the R&D done by the developed countries. And there should be a dedicated multilateral fund also, which can finance such R&D activities and the transition activities both. And there should not be any restrictions on the polymer production per se. Therefore, the phase outs, they should be pragmatic in nature, taking into account the concerns of the developing countries like India. And simultaneously, there should also be a single-use plastic ban that India has also done. Now, what suggestions can we give regarding the phasing out of the plastic for controlling the plastic pollution? One, we can phase out the single-use plastic. We can recommend models, for example, as adopted by Rwanda. India has also phased out the single-use plastic. We can promote the circular economy, for example, as done in Austria. The Austrian circular economy example can be given. The alternatives, they can be scaled, the biodegradable and compostable plastic, so that their cost can be brought down through the economy of scale, and there can be a global treaty on plastic. Additionally, we can recommend that there should be a proper solid waste management also, ensuring the collection and segregation at the source itself, and there should be a disposal as per the scientific norms, for example, recycling, incineration rather than only the landfill. For the plastic waste collection, there should be a mechanism, for example, the ideas like deposit refund system, the extended producer responsibility can be implemented worldwide, and the packaging alternatives can be explored, for example, eco-friendly packaging, the biodegradable alternatives. Simultaneously, the social behavior also has to be managed. We can go for the nudge effect, for example, the 3R, and adopting a circular economy for promoting recycling, production and the use. The government rules and penalties can also be put in place for ensuring a complete ban and usage on the production of the single-use plastic, and the scientific evidence should be used for the policy making as well. As Gandhiji said, that there is enough on earth for everybody's need but not enough for anybody's greed. Therefore, the usage of plastic has to be avoided collectively by everyone, and it is also our fundamental duty under Article 51A subclause G to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife, etc., and to have compassion towards living creatures. There is a means practice question as well. Plastic pollution poses a serious threat to the environmental sustainability and human health. Analyze the challenges that India faces in tackling plastic pollution. Also discuss the steps taken by the government to address the issue. Please try to write it. The next article is related to criminal defamation. This is important in GS2 under the topic Indian Constitution Significant Provisions. Specifically Article 19 subclause 2 of the Indian Constitution, which provides for the reasonable restrictions upon the right to freedom of speech and expression in India. First, what is defamation? Defamation means making false statements. False statements against any individual can damage his reputation. It can cause an injury to his reputation, and reputation is also like property, and the loss of reputation can lead to the loss of human dignity as well. Defamation can be written defamation or oral defamation. The written defamation is libel, and the oral or spoken form of defamation is slander. When we contrast the defamation with Article 19, then Article 19 subclause 1 subclause A provides for the right to freedom of speech and expression. But this is a qualified right. Restrictions can be imposed upon it. The reasonable restrictions which can be imposed upon the right are prescribed under Article 19 subclause 2 of the Constitution. They may include the restrictions on the ground of contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offence. Now, defamation can be a civil wrong or a criminal wrong. It can be a civil wrong as through the law of torts the damages can be awarded. The damages can be awarded to the person whose reputation has been injured. And it is a criminal wrong also. For example, it is a bailable offence, it is a compoundable offence. Compoundable offence means that the settlement can be arrived upon outside the court. And it is a non-cognizable offence, which means that the police cannot arrest the accused without a warrant from the magistrate. Now, there are certain defenses also available for the accused in case there are allegations of defamation. For example, if the statement made is true, then it does not amount to defamation. Also, if the comments made are fair comments keeping in mind the public interest and they are based on true incidents, then that also does not amount to defamation. Now, there are certain observations regarding defamation given by the judiciary. For example, in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2015, the court quashed the Section 66A of the IT Act. The Section 66A of the IT Act penalized the sending of offensive messages which may be sent by a communication device. The court held that it is not legal, and the term offensive has not been defined, it is too ambiguous. In Subramaniam Swamy versus Union of India in 2016, the court observed that the restriction imposed upon the right to freedom of speech on the ground of defamation, it is constitutionally valid. And defamation amounts to a public wrong, and it is not a disproportionate restriction upon the freedom of speech. And also there is a right to reputation as well provided under Article 21 implicitly. Article 21 provides for the right to life and personal liberty. Also, in the Cure SMA India Foundation case in 2025 recently, the Supreme Court observed that in case there is a conflict, then the right to dignity provided under Article 21 will take precedence over the right to freedom of speech and expression provided under Article 19 subclause 1 subclause A, and the court observed that dignity is central to the constitutional morality. When it comes to the ethical perspectives on the free speech, we can observe that John Stuart Mill provides for the harm principle. Through the harm principle, we can say that the free speech can be curtailed in case it causes harm, otherwise the free speech should be allowed. The Kantian ethics provides that the human beings should be treated as an end in themselves rather than as a means, and if free speech is affecting the dignity, then it should be curtailed. And the social contract theory provides that if free speech can cause social instability, then it can be curtailed. And as per consequentialism, if the free speech leads to negative impact, public harm, then it can be curtailed if it is having negative consequences. The next article is related to ethanol blending in petrol. This is important in GS3 under the topic infrastructure energy. Before coming to the article, let's discuss the background of ethanol blending in petrol. India imports its energy needs, 85% of our crude oil needs. Therefore, we wanted to blend the ethanol in petrol to reduce the import bill. Ethanol is 99.9% pure alcohol. Initially, we had the target of achieving 20% ethanol blending in petrol by 2030. We advanced that target also by achieving 20% ethanol blended petrol by 2025. This target has been achieved last month itself. Now, how is ethanol generated? Initially, the focus was on generation of ethanol from the molasses from the sugarcane, and the initial focus was upon the generation of ethanol from the C-heavy molasses, whereby out of the total fermentable sugar content of 13.5 to 14%, there is a non-recoverable of about 2 to 2.5% that is used in the generation of ethanol, but that led to the lesser quantity of ethanol being produced. Then the sugar mills, they started using the B heavy molasses also, where an extra 1.5 to 2% of total fermentable sugar is also left in the molasses, leading to the production of more ethanol quantity. And then there was the fermentation of the entire total fermentable sugar into ethanol itself, leading to larger production of the ethanol. Now the feedstock then got diversified. They started producing the ethanol using the rice and grains also, not only sugarcane molasses. This led to the increased production of the ethanol. The production was higher, even the millets were used, and it is linked to the starch content usually. But this process is longer, because the starch that is there in the grains, that is first converted into simpler sugars before it is fermented using the yeast. And there is incentive also given from the side of the government to plug that differential pricing. Now, to ensure that there is a year-round production, therefore the mills like the Triveni, DCM, Shriram, etc., they operate on multiple feedstocks. From November to April, they are using molasses at the feedstock for producing the ethanol, and after that there is diversification. This diversification minimizes the supply fluctuation so that the production happens year-round, and the price volatility is also curbed because now they are not dependent upon any one crop also. Thus, it led to a boost in the ethanol production, and the all India average blending with petrol in 2022-23 itself was about 11.75%. And there is a new demand for grains, for example in UP the sugarcane, and in Bihar the maize, for the production of ethanol. And during the times of El Nino induced monsoon uncertainties, the government also banned the exports for the production of ethanol domestically. There are byproduct benefits also. For example, the liquid effluent which is left after that, which is known as the spent wash from the molasses, that is concentrated into 60% solids, and that is used as boiler fuel along with bagasse. And the ash which is produced from the boiler, that contains 28% potash, which is used as fertilizer. Similarly, from the grain distilleries which are using the grains to produce the ethanol, there the spent wash is sent into the centrifuge and it is concentrated to form the animal feed. But there are certain issues with the ethanol blending. For example, if food grains are used for the production of ethanol, it may create food security concerns in India. Also, the crops that are used for the production of ethanol, they are usually water intensive, for example sugarcane, and the cost of production remains high. The cost is brought down by the incentives which are given by the government. And the flex fuel vehicles, that will also face the probable damage due to the increased blending of ethanol into petrol, and there are emission concerns also. For example, the ethanol itself may be a relatively cleaner fuel, but the production process of ethanol, that also causes emissions. But there are certain concerns with respect to the usage of ethanol blended petrol in the cars and two-wheelers. For example, it may reduce the fuel economy. It may even shorten the engine's lifespan. For example, it causes corrosion to the engine, and it may lead to huge repair bills as well. But the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas has termed these concerns as largely unfounded, saying that these are not backed by scientific data. So this biofuels usage, it is our key tool towards achieving two ends mainly. One, reducing the dependency upon the energy imports, and two, reducing the carbon footprint of the country. And the cars which are sold since 2023, they are understood to have been tuned and ready for the E20 fuel. But the cars which were sold before that, they may not be ready for the E20 fuel. And the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas has acknowledged that there will be a small drop in the fuel economy, but that drop will only be marginal, and it is estimated to be around 1 to 2% for the four-wheelers which were designed for E10 and calibrated for E20. The next article is related to India-USA trade template. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests. US has signed trade deals with various countries, but most of them are lopsided deals in favor of USA. For example, when we look at USA-EU deal, USA imposes 15% baseline tariff on most exports from European Union to USA. whereas in return it gets greater market access in European Union at lower tariffs with no concessions. Simultaneously, European Union has committed to invest 600 billion euros in the US, and it has even committed to go for energy purchases from the US over a period of 3 years to the tune of 750 billion euros. And the negotiation tactic of the USA has been the same. It threatens to impose 30% tariffs. When we look at the USA Japan deal, Japan has also committed to go for $550 billion investment in USA, and in return it has given duty free access for most US goods, whereas USA imposes 15% tariffs on Japan. When we look at USA South Korea deal, again South Korea has also committed to invest $350 billion in US projects which are owned and controlled by the US, but still it faces 20% tariffs. And on top of that, another 20% tariffs for the transshipped goods, that is, which are coming from another country through South Korea and going into USA. In the US Vietnam deal as well, Vietnam got a hard bargain. Despite signing the deal early, it got 20% tariffs with US, whereas the ASEAN nations which did not have a deal with US, they are tariffed at 19%. In the US UK deal, again UK agreed for structured negotiated approach in the investments, but it got 10% tariffs imposed despite it having a trade deficit from USA. In the Switzerland deal as well, US is getting that favor as there is an early agreement, but 39% tariffs are imposed upon the goods exported from the Switzerland to USA. Even the legality of the US actions can be challenged. For example, it amounts to the violation of the WTO GATT rules. The Article 1 of the rules provide for the most favored nation principle, whereas the US tariffs, they discriminate between the trading partners. Also, the Article 2 bound tariffs, but the US exceeds the mutually agreed tariff rates as well. Even the European Union's concessions could face the WTO challenges. For example, it has allowed the US preferential European Union market access, but then it must also allow the same to the other trading partners also. There are domestic legal challenges also in the US that the Trump's executive actions are facing in the courts in US, and there are implementation practical issues also. For example, EU has committed to purchase 750 billion euro of energy from USA over a period of 3 years. Is it even realistic? And the private sector investment commitments have been given by the governments, but the private sector has not committed for that. And the US customs is also itself unprepared regarding the imposition of the tariffs, for which it had to postpone the imposition from 31st July to 7th of August. And there is lack of detailed text also in the most deals, which causes the concerns regarding their actual implementation also. Now, coming to the article, there is an idea floating around that India's hesitance, India's reluctance to enter into a complete strategic lock-in with the USA or to completely open its market to the US is hindering the bilateral ties. But it does not seem to be true, because in the past also India's reluctance to enter into a strategic lock-in or to open its market completely has held India in good stead. For example, the alliances, they are not insulated from the shifts in the priorities, whether it is Trump or any other. For example, Joe Biden was the president when Australia scrapped a $90 billion deal with France to build conventional diesel electric submarines. Rather, it entered into a pact with US and UK, the AUKUS pact, whereas France was left in the limbo. Likewise, India now becomes increasingly prepared to bear the cost of the autonomy, and rather than bearing the cost of the subservience, we should rather bear the cost of the autonomy, and therefore turning into a front line of any US strategy, whether it is of containment of another country or the expansion of its own interest, will not really be beneficial for India. The next article is related to Rabindranath Tagore and Adi Shankaracharya. This is important in GS4 under the topic Contribution of Moral Thinkers and Philosophers from India and the World. First, let's discuss about Rabindranath Tagore. He was popularly known as Gurudev. He was conferred upon knighthood by British King George V, but he renounced his knighthood after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. In 1913, he was also given the Nobel Prize in Literature. With respect to his relation with Gandhi, some of his opinions were similar, but at some places he contrasted. Both Tagore and Gandhi opposed militant nationalism, but Tagore rejected mass boycotts and the superstition-based moralism. Additionally, Tagore founded the Vishwa Bharati University in Shanti Niketan, and his compositions include the National Anthem of India, Jan Gan Man, and the Bangladesh National Anthem, Amar Shonar Bangla. He also composed Gitanjali, which is a collection of poems, and the song Ekla Chalore. He preferred humanity over patriotism, as he observed that nation is a mechanical construct rather, and he favored humanity and compassion. He was also against xenophobia, especially after the Seattle incident, where he was stopped and humiliated during immigration to USA, whereas he had visited USA earlier as well. Next, let's discuss about Adi Shankaracharya. Adi Shankaracharya was the foremost proponent of the Advait Vedant, that is non-dualism of Atman, soul, or Brahman, that is universal reality. As per Adi Shankaracharya, dualism is illusion, whereas Brahman alone is the real, whereas world is illusory. He propounded for liberation through knowledge, and knowledge can be attained through 6 methods. Pratyaksh, that is knowledge by perception by utilizing the senses. Anuman, that is knowledge by inference. Upman, that is knowledge by analogy. Shabd or Agam, that is knowledge by testimony. Arthpatti, that is knowledge by postulation. And Anuplabdhi, that is knowledge by negation. His works included the Srotas, the Vivek Chudamani, Atambodh, etc. And he unified the Hindu Sampradayas through the Panchayatan Puja. Earlier the sects were fighting each other, but he unified them by worshipping Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti, Ganpati and Surya together. He also established 4 mats in India, that is Jyotirmath in Uttarakhand, Sringeri Sharda Math in Karnataka, Govardhan Math in Odisha and Dwarka Sharda Math in Gujarat. The next article is related to the fighter conundrum of the Indian Air Force. This is important in GS3 under the topic Defense. We have been using MiG-21s since a long time. MiG-21 was the first supersonic jet for the Indian Air Force that we acquired in 1963, and it has been a mainstay for the Indian Air Force for decades. In 1965, 1971 war, 1999 Kargil conflict, and even in 2019 Balakot it has been used. But it has a high accident rate. There have been over 450 crashes from the MiG-21s, and therefore it earned the nickname Flying Coffins. But globally it has achieved success, as over 6,000 units were produced and it is used by more than 30 countries. Now the final squadrons are left. Only 2 Bison squadrons, number 3 Cobras and number 23 Panthers remain. Now what are the challenges for India now? One, the squadron strength is falling. For example, the retirement of these will reduce the IAF strength to 29 squadrons, whereas 42 squadrons have been sanctioned. There are delays in the production and the acquisition of the Light Combat Aircraft Mark 1A, the LCA Mark 1A. 83 jets were ordered in a 48,000 crore deal, but none has been delivered, whereas the delivery was to start in March 2024 itself. The delays were caused by the GE engine delays, which arrived first in April 2024 after a delay of 1.5 years. Also, the fleet is aging. For example, the Jaguars, the Mirage 2000s and MiG-29s, they are set to retire by 2030. And even the Sukhoi M30 MKIs, they also need upgrades. Simultaneously, there is a threat from the cross borders. For example, China-Pakistan threat. China has 1900 plus fighters, including the 5th generation jets and even J-35s for Pakistan. And for the medium range fighter aircrafts, there is stagnation, as 114 deals have been stalled since the request for information proposed in 2019. There are production bottlenecks also. For example, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited current capacity is 16 jets per year, whereas we will need to produce more than 24 jets per year to meet the demand. Now, what can be the way forward? First, for the immediate measures, we will need to increase the deliveries of the LCA Mark 1A from the HAL. It can be increased to 24 jets per year. For the interim time, we will need the 5th generation fighters also. We can explore the Sukhoi 57 or F-35 imports. For the medium term, we will need to replace the Mirage 2000, MiG-29 and the Jaguars. We can replace them with the LCA Mark II. Even the upgradation of Sukhoi 30 MKI will be needed, and 84 jets have been been approved for modernization. For the long run, we will need to develop the advanced medium combat aircraft 5th generation indigenous jets. Prototype can be ready in 10 years, but private sector participation will also be needed. For the phase 1, we can use the GE engines, and for the phase 2, we will need to develop the 110 kilonewton engine also, which can be co-developed with a foreign partner. And 600 plus jets will be needed by 2040, will include the LCA Mark 1A, Mark 2 and the medium range fighter aircraft as well as the advanced medium combat aircraft. For the engine independence, for the time being we can go for the licensed production, but in future we will go for the co-development of the engines also, indigenous engines. For the fulfilling of the Navy's needs, there is the development of the twin engine deck based fighter also, which is ongoing. Thank you.